Welcome back to the channel. In today's video, I'll be showing you how to auto-assign days of the week with Notion formula automations. Whether that's next Friday, next Monday, this Friday, or this Monday, we'll be relying on the day formula function where we can extract the day of the week from any date. As you can see on the screen, Mondays are shown as 1 and Sundays are shown as 7. We'll just need a database with a select property, a date property, and a formula property to get started. I'll begin by creating the formula as if it would be in a database, and then transfer that over into a Notion formula automation to show you that transition and how you might relate it to your context and or needs. Before we sort of break down and create this formula, I want to break down the formula logic for calculating the next day of the week and how we can use the day formula to do that. If you do some basic math, if we take today's date and then add 7, that will give us next week for today's current day. But if we're aiming for a specific time of the week, let's say next Friday, for example, we need to subtract the difference between the days before the next day of the week. So let's think about how we want to calculate the next day of the week. Using the day formula function, we can decide which day of the week that we're looking to automate. So if we wanted to create an automation for automatically assigning next Friday in our case, we want to think about 5 as Friday of next week. So that is where this formula automation begins, is by deciding what day of the week do I want to automatically assign a due date for. Is it next Wednesday or next Sunday? And based on that day of the week, we can use this number within our formula to get exactly what we're looking for. So if today's day of the week is signified by day of the date, which is the formula, we also want to look at the preferred day of the week, whether that's 1 through 7, where Monday is 1 and Sunday is 7. And then to find the days before the next day of the week, we can actually take the difference of today's day of the week and subtract it from the preferred day of the week, in our case Friday. So we want to subtract 5 from today's day of the week and then take that difference and subtract it from the 7 that we added in the beginning. But because we want to specify next Friday, we want to make sure to take that difference and account for it with this simple formula logic. Maybe this doesn't make sense now, but when we're calculating it in the formula, it might make a little more sense to you. And the reason why I'm doing it here is to verify your formula works first before inputting it into a formula automation, because it can be hard to check to see if it works because it's not necessarily a property anymore and it just is part of an automation. So you have to test the automation every time to see if it works. If we want to calculate next Friday from today, we need to do a few things. So let's start by creating this formula for next Friday. We're going to use the let's formula function. Open it up, close it up, and then let's start by using that day function. Let's define day as a variable and then use day, open parentheses, and then instead of now, which I've been using in the past, I will use today, which removes the timestamp associated with the date. If you still want to associate the timestamp, you can use now, but I'm going to use today. I'm going to define it as the day of today, and then I'm going to output day, which is the variable that I just defined. And as you can see, it's 4 because today is Thursday, which means it's 4. And so if I look at this logic that I've shared, we need to add 7 to today's date and then subtract the days before the next day of the week. And to subtract the days before the next day of the week, we need to calculate the difference between today's day of the week and the preferred day of the week. And so we need to calculate that difference within this formula. And so in our case, I'm going to add difference, and the difference here is day minus Friday, which Friday is going to be 5. And so the difference within this calculation is going to be day minus 5. Now, what we also want to do is add 7 to today's date and then subtract that difference. And so to add our next Friday date, we need to use the date add formula function, and we need to add today's with 7 minus the difference, which we just calculated, and that's going to be in days. And so we're going to add a comma to define it, and then now I'm going to add that next Friday date in that output to see what that looks like. So if I were to open up my calendar there and we want to look at next Friday, so this is this Friday, and so next Friday would be December 27th, and we see that there. And so I'm going to just remove that. And so next Friday is December 27th, like we just saw here. Now, remember, the reason why this works is because we want to add a week to today's date to gauge next week, but then we also want to gauge the day for today and the day of the day for the preferred day of the week. In our case, Friday, which is equivalent to 5, right? And then we take that difference and then subtract it from 7 so that we have that exact approximation. So now that we can verify that this works, we can move on to the Notion formula automation. So there's many different ways that you can do this formula. I did this for the intuitiveness for the viewer. And so you can define this in however many ways you want. But now that we have this set up, we can use this, copy it within a formula automation. Now, to create this action, we also want to add an action for next Friday. And so whenever this select property is selecting next Friday, we'll change the date that corresponds to that database entry to this date that we just formulaically calculated. So if we go to view automations and go to select next Friday, then we want to create our dynamic variable and then define it as the date as a custom formula for variable 1. Now we can go to edit as formula, paste it in there, save it, and let's see what happens if we just paste it and create it. Now if I go to select and go to next Friday, the date formula appears like so. And so that was a quick copy and paste formula iteration from formula property to Notion automation. In our case, we didn't use the trigger page variable or the trigger page function within the Notion formula because we're just relying on the native functions, which are today and day, which is just building off of the present moment of today in the formula itself. Now, if we were to relate other properties or consider manipulating other properties related to this database entry, that's when we would need to use the trigger page and identify those. But in our case, we're running a simple calculation and then using that calculation to manipulate and change another property, in our case, a date, and for next Friday. Now, the beauty of this is if we wanted to add this week or this Friday, for example, right? This Friday as another select property action to change this date. We can also do that by adding another variable, labeling this Friday with T in front of it, and then we can actually just copy paste it that way, and then we'll add a comma to make sure those errors disappear. And then actually all we really have to do is remove the 7 because 7 implies next week. So now we've defined a variable that signifies this Friday. And so we need to create conditions to accommodate those differences. So in our case, we need to do an ifs formula and say ifs the trigger page dot select is equal to next Friday. Then we want to showcase end Friday. If the trigger page dot select is equal to this Friday, then we want to showcase T Friday, that variable we just defined in this let's formula. So now we can save it. In our case, we need to now also change this trigger action to any option because that was just accounting for when next Friday starts. So now I can go here, change this to this Friday, and that date changes to December 20th, which is a day from today. Now if I do next Friday, that date will change to December 27th, which is next Friday. So again, I just mentioned that we didn't use a trigger page, in this initial formula output for next Friday. And that's because we specified one condition for when the select property was just for next Friday. But if we want to account for all different outcomes or different choices for next Friday or this Friday or any other choices you might want to add, we want to change this trigger to when any option is selected. And then to account for any option, we also need to create those conditions within the formula itself, which requires the use of a trigger page and then selecting its necessary property and then specifying the conditions like so, like we would a normal Notion formula property. This might have been a little confusing in terms of a logic standpoint, but I hope that this sort of helps you think about the manipulation of Notion formulas further and how to think about those trigger conditions and those variable conditions, and even just the simple logic that I introduced here, in hopes that maybe you'll learn a thing or two and you'll be able to apply this in your workspace. If you made it this far, thanks for watching. I'll see you in the next one.